Hi, I'm Quinn Wildman, and today I'm going to give you a talk on creating your first InterBase application with Delphi. We're going to break this task up into three pieces. The first piece is going to be creating a simple database with IBConsole. Secondly, we're going to create a simple application with Delphi. And then finally, we're going to go off and see how we can deploy it. So the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that the InterBase server is running. Now you'll notice that I have a whole bunch of different versions of InterBase listed here. This is because I have using the multi-instance option of InterBase. You probably won't have that, so you'll have just one InterBase. So the first thing we want to do is go off and run Server Manager. Now RAD Studio and Delphi come with a developer edition of InterBase. The developer edition only runs for 48 hours. After 48 hours, you have to restart the server. So what you want to do is, if you're not sure, you want to stop the server. And then when you run it again, I recommend you make it run as automatic and make it run as a Windows service. And now we've got the InterBase server running, and we'll be able to do all our connections. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to run IBConsole. And we're going to go off and create a database. And we'll make it be in the MyDBs directory, and we'll call it who1. Okay, we're going to use the default password, master key. And now we're going to go off and create a simple table. Our table, we're going to right click and do create. We'll make the name of our table be employees. Now, a good table will always have a key, and it'll be a single field key. It could be some type of nonsensical value. Typically, this is just an integer value that we're going to do. I like calling my keys obj_id. That's what we're going to do. That's an integer. All keys have to be not null, so we'll check not null. And then we'll create a first name field. And we're going to make that be a varchar 15. And a last name field. And we'll make that be varchar 20. We'll create a hire date. Make that be date. And we'll add a gender field. And we'll make that be a char1. And then finally, we're going to add a time entered. And we'll make that be a timestamp. And we're going to give this one a default value of current underscore timestamp. And then we're going to specify our primary key, which is obj_id. And we're going to add a check constraint. A check constraint is, in this case, we're going to make sure that our gender field is either an M or an F. So I'm going to double click on here. Check gender equals M or gender or F. Okay. We've got our table created. Now we can look at our table here. The one thing we might look at here is here's the metadata that got created for this. So if we wanted to, in the future, we could use this metadata to create our own table. In fact, let's do that. So let's go off. I'm going to copy that to clipboard. Okay. We'll use that in just a moment. Now we're also going to go off and create a generator. So I'm going to right click just like I did a moment ago and create a generator. I'll call it my_gen. And now we're going to go off and do a little bit of SQL. Now we're going to create a trigger. Now we could create a trigger here. but instead we're going to use the SQL window. Okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to go off and create another table just to see if we can do that. So we'll create employees 2, for example. Okay, and we're going to make it a little simpler. Turns out these quotes are not required, so we'll take them out. And that will execute that SQL. And now we have an employees 2 created. Okay, so now we're going to get a little SQL here. And it turns out I have an example I'm just going to copy. Okay, now that example here, you notice this example here has something about creating a generator. We won't do that part. We'll just do the generator part. So I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. I'm going to paste it here. Execute that, and now I have my trigger created. So now that I have my trigger created, we're ready to go off and import some data. I notice employees 2 got created. Now we're going to go to the data tab, and we're going to import a common delimited file. So let's see what that file looks like first, just so you can see. This looks like that, standard common delimited file. Then we're going to right click and we're going to import data. We're going to point to that file you just saw. Turns out I've got everything set up matching up. Click OK. 43 rows imported. And you notice that generator value that we created got filled in, and the time entered got filled in. Okay, so everything looks good. Now the last thing we'll do is let's create an index for that table. So just like our creating our table and creating our generator, similar here. So we'll call this, how about name, and going to go off of the employees table. We'll do name and first name. There's the index we created. Notice that we can look at the metadata just like we could with our table. That's the SQL we can enter if we want. Okay? Now that we've created our database, we're going to go off and create a C++ builder application. So we're going to create a FireMonkey application to do that. And first we're going to do some housekeeping. So the first thing I like to do is to save everything. And we'll call this our main. And we'll leave the default precompiled headers. And we'll call it InterBase demo. And now change the name of the form. And we'll change the caption. And we'll add a panel to the bottom. And line that to the bottom. A little smaller. Okay, similarly, we're going to add a navigator. And we'll align that one to the top. And then we're going to add a grid where we're going to see our data. And we'll align that one to the client. Now we're going to create a new data module. And we'll save that as well. And we'll call it em_foo. And And now we're going to add our InterBase components that we need. We're going to add a TIB database and a TIB transaction and a TIB dataset. And it turns out you can use the structure pane just to drag and drop things to connect things. That's nothing new, but we'll go ahead and do that anyway. So we'll drag our transaction onto our database, drag our dataset onto our database, and everything's all connected there. Now I'm going to double click on the TIB database, browse to our database that we created earlier. And we'll use the default username and password of sysdba and master key. And we're not going to need a login prompt. We'll test to see that works. Good, it does. Okay, now we're going to set up some things about our data set. First, we need to see how we're going to get our data. So we're going to get the first name, last name, hire date, gender, and it turns out the object ID as well. And let's order by name. Okay, a few more things to set up here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our generator field. This is actually where we're going to get we're going to populate that generator. So we're going to use the mygen, and we're going to use our key field of IG to do that. Next thing we're going to do is we need to go to the fields editor and add all the fields. And then the object ID field. The IDE here makes the object ID field be required because it's not null. But in this case, we're getting the value from the server. We don't actually need to do that. So we're going to turn required off to do that. Okay. And then lastly, for our data set, we're going to go to the dataset editor, and we're going to see our key field is just object ID, and the update fields are everything except for object ID. And we'll generate SQL. Notice I created my modify, my insert, my delete, and my refresh, all there for me. Okay, and I'm pressing Control S to save that. Now we'll go back here. Let's use that data module which we just created. And now we're going to go to the visually bind everything. So now let's make things look a little bit nicer here. We'll drag our string grid over here. Here's our data is coming from. So we'll drag to here, drag to here. And now we have our data source going to our navigator and going to our grid. Now what we have to do is notice that object ID field is showing up there. We don't want that to show up when we're finally showing everything. So we're going to go to the columns editor. We're going to add all the fields. And then we'll make the object ID field be not visible. Okay, I think I'm going to save this, just save all again, because I like to do that. And let's run our project just to see that our basic project works so far. Oh, we forgot to make our data be active, but we don't see any data. So let's go off and make our data set be active. We'll run that again. Now we see our data. So and go to the beginning. Okay, and let's see here. Find me. Here I am. Let's delete that record. Delete it. And we'll run again just to prove that it really did get deleted. There I am. I'm gone. And now I'll add myself back in. And yes, that was my original hire date back in a golden day a long time ago. Okay, I will quit that. Run it one more time. Go to the end, and there I am. So our simple application works. Okay, now let's go off and do some things. We're going to make it run for 64-bit, and we're going to make it work for to-go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go off and make the database be not connected. Now, the reason we're doing that is because when you're running to go, the licenses for to go only allow you to have one connection to a database at a time. And so if we have a connection in the IDE and we have a connection in your application, you're going to get an InterBase licensing error. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up our connection all in code now. Never rely on the IDE for our connection. That way we'll never have any worry about any licensing. Okay? So we're going to make this be for embedded, which means InterBase to go. And we'll add the new 64-bit platform. And while I'm thinking about it, we're going to need PA server, so let's go off and run PA servers. We'll need that in just a moment. Prompts me for a password. I'm going to say no password. Okay, and so now we're going to go off and write just a little bit of code. We're going to double-click on our data module, go to the form create for our data module. And first thing we're going to do is have a string. Fix that quote. IB database 1. And we're going to assign the database name property to be that string. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open up our data set. Okay, so notice that this now relies on a different place for our database. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use the deployment manager to say where that's going to be. Okay, so let's go off and go to the deployment manager. Oh, sure, we'll go ahead and off and build that. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to go to, let's add our database first, so we don't forget that. So there's our database. So now that database is going to be deployed to the same directory where our exe is. And because it's all in the same path, same place, we'll see that in a minute, it'll just work. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to add the to-go files. So there's a link right here called Add Featured Files. Now notice our original application, it really used the InterBase client. Now the InterBase client was already pre-installed with RAD Studio, but if you wanted to make a deployment where you had the InterBase client, just go off here and you've got the deployment automatically of InterBase client. So now we're going to say InterBase to go, and we'll say sure gives everything, even though we're not doing OS X32 right now. Okay, so it's got all these different files here that I've already got in place. The most important one here is this reg ib2go.txt. I got that by getting my InterBase to go deployment license, which is included with RAD Studio, and registering it. When you do that, follow the directions, ultimately you get this file in this place. So we've got our licensing all in place. Okay, build all these files that we need. So let's go off and just deploy that now instead of running it, and see. Oh, we got to assign our profile. So we're going to assign our remote profile, which I've already set up here. And let's go off and deploy that. And now let's go look to see what it did. Okay, so here's our PA server directory. That creates a scratcher directory. This is our directory for from our profile. And there's my InterBase demo, and there's my InterBase demo exe. Let's run that. Comes up just like we saw before. But notice it created all these files. Here's my database that I needed. These are all the files I need for the deployment that I've made. And in fact, here is even the InterBase licensing that you need. Okay, so now we're going to do one last thing to our project here to make it a little bit better. Now, this application, if you don't put it in program files, it'll work perfectly. However, if you put it in program files, there's a problem. The problem is that you can't read and write, or you can read, but you can't write the directories in program files. So if you're going to install the program files, you need to pick someplace else. One place to do that is to the app data directory. So if we want to see on my machine where app data is, we could just go like this. That's the app data directory on my machine. Or another way to do it, you could say, and there's the app data directory in my machine. Now, typically, you'd probably install some directories below that, but we're just going to have our database live in that directory is what we're going to do. So we're going to go off and we're going to go and edit that code that we've got. Let's close the Live Bindings Designer. We don't need that anymore. And we're going to edit this code here. Unfortunately, I've got this code saved in Notepad. It's going to be very similar to what we had before. So notice in this case, what we're doing is we've still got that database name just like before, but here in this case, we're figuring out where is the app data directory. Okay, so then our database now is we're going to go off and copy that database to the app data directory if it doesn't already exist, and then open it. Okay, so let's go ahead and build this project. Okay, and let's go off and deploy it. And now let's go off and run it. Now, before we run it, let's see here. So where that, we got to go find where PA server is, which is right here. So this is supposed to copy foo1.ib. So let's go look to the app data directory first. And I believe I've got one right there right now. So let's go off and delete it. Yep. And there we go, got our application running. Okay, now I've forgotten a couple other things before, so we're going to go skip back and cover those other things. When we were using IBConsole and we imported our data, that would work just fine, but there's a lot better ways to do that. Typically, you would use some sort of data pump utility. So I'm going to show you a number of different ways that you might get your data in other ways. First of all, there's a lot of data pump utilities out there. Here's one that's on our Code Central website. So you can see the URL there is cc.embarcadero.com/item/23688. This utility, as you can see, hasn't been updated for a while, but it might work out pretty good for getting something going. Another way you might go is that RadStudio actually has a data pump utility inside of it. So let's look to see where that is. So we'll go to the samples here. We just come with RadStudio. Go to Delphi. Database, DB Express, DBX Data Pump, and we'll just load that project just to see that it loads. And then we can see that we've got something there. Another way you might go is to use Change Manager. If you've got Change Manager can do data pump type utilities. And then lastly, in charge of getting your data, you can also do something with InterBase called foreign files. A foreign file is basically a text file. That's a fixed length file, and then you can define a foreign file there that looks like that. And so now if we go, let's see, the foreign file section is just a little bit below here. Here it is right here. So you create something like that. So that's a fixed length file. We've got a file called file.txt for the first name 10 characters, last name 10 characters, higher date 8 characters, and then in between each line 1 characters for this one. Now typically on Windows you would have 2 characters. The 1 character would be something if you came from Linux or a Macintosh. You can see this is on page 102. And if we go up here, we can see the section here. And it's talking about creating tables here, a bunch of creating table stuff. The next thing we're going to do is when we did created our generator, I wanted to show you an example of how creating that generator looks in the documentation. So this is in the create trigger section. And if we go down just a little bit, here's some code that looks almost exactly like, right here. It was actually this one. Looks almost exactly like the code that we did in the example earlier. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is, it turns out behind the scenes, I'd created a couple environment variables to help me do what I'm doing. Now, if you're not using multi-instance for InterBase, you don't need to do this at all. But if you are using InterBase multi-instance, you might find this helpful. So we're just going to go look at environment variables on our system. Click the environment variables button. So I have something called an IB protocol environment variable that I've set up. This is the label name for the instance that I've created. And then I've also created an environment variable called InterBase, which is the location where InterBase is installed. And then we can also see those settings in the IDE by going to Tools, Options, and then you go to Environment Variables. And you'll see IB protocol there, and you see the InterBase environment variable there. And that's the end of our talk for today. I invite your questions.
While we're waiting for questions, Quinn, is there anything you want to add?
Sure. I thought about one thing that might be interesting. So you'll notice that the licensing for To-Go just auto-magically happened. And so I thought, until we have some more questions, I would cover briefly how that actually happened. So you'll, if you've bought RAD Studio, the one thing you get with it is an InterBase test deployment license. Okay, so that's a separate license, or serial number, and I just automatically use that with it. So let's talk about how you would use that and how that all works. Okay, so the first, so when you get that serial number, you do get a link to the InterBase quick start guide for To-Go, and really what I'm going to talk about is all covered there. But let's talk about it in detail anyway. So the first thing you do when you get your serial number is you go off and register that serial number. Now, this registration is a little bit different because most registrations are typically tied to a particular computer, and this registration is not going to be. Okay? So what you do is you take your web browser to reg.codegear.com. Can you show that to people, Andrews? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, why don't you bring that up? We can just see that real quick. Let me know.
Where do you want to go?
Reg.codegear.com.
Okay.
Okay, so you'll notice there it asks for your serial number and asks for a registration code. Okay, serial number, you should know what that is. That a registration code, that in the when you got your product, you should have gotten a registration code there. You'll follow the magic prompts there, and in the end you're going to get an activation file, which will be something like reg_some_long_number.txt. Okay, so now you've got that file on your computer. Then what you have to do is you have to copy that to the InterBase, the IB registrar for InterBase. So the InterBase Quick Start Guide tells you to copy that file. So basically, you copy that file to where the InterBase deployment files are, as the Quick Start Guide goes. And then now they're in the right spot, and now the deployment manager, as you saw, it goes off and uses them. Now let's go and talk about those licenses for just a moment, because they're a little bit different. Those deployment licenses. So those deployment licenses, the one you get initially can be used for 90 days on as many computers as you want. There's no limitation. So you want to go deploy it on machine 1, machine 2, test deployment on it. The idea is someday you might be deploying it on some mobile machine, wherever you're going, that's okay. Okay. Now that license is going to expire after 90 days though. That's why it's called test deployment. But what you can do then is you can go off and use the same process, register again, and get a new activation file. That process will work until August something, 2014. The Quick Start Guide highlights how that all works. And so you can keep doing test deployments for 2 years. Any questions queued up yet?
Oh, yeah. We got 5 of them now.
Okay, cool.
Have you tried using C++ Builder 64-bit to create a 64-bit UDF for InterBase? Does it work?
No, I've not tried that, but there shouldn't be any problem. It should work just the same. That's a good topic for someone to try out. Maybe we'll. I actually saw one recently. Actually, Jeff Overcash actually posted one for InterBase. Sorry, for Delphi, I think. Maybe we'll see if we can get Jeff to make one for C++.
All right. Can you discuss InterBase's SMP support? Are we understanding correctly that performance can actually degrade if there's only a single connection to the server?
A single connection. Well, so SMP stands for Symmetric Multiprocessing. Okay. So InterBase in the box gives you 8 connections. Okay. So you've got 8 cores / CPUs. So a question I guess here is, how can I get the best performance with only one user? Okay. Well, first of all, that only applies to the server edition. So if you had only one user, maybe you want to use to go, and that wouldn't be a problem at all. But to get your best performance, really what you're saying is I don't want any other threads lying around in the InterBase server. There's the IBConfig file, and there's a setting in there called max threads. You could set that to 0 to get your maximum performance. Next question.
All right. Is IBConsole a separate program, or is it in the C++ Builder IDE?
It's a separate program that gets installed to the InterBase group where InterBase is installed. It'll be in the InterBase group in the group as a shortcut. Anders, do you have InterBase installed on that machine?
No, not on this machine. We can share yours if you want.
No, let's not worry about it. It'll just be in the InterBase group. It's a shortcut in the InterBase group for IBConsole.
Okay. Can I use InterBase Server 32-bit with a 64-bit C++ Windows app and use InterBase Server 64-bit with a 32-bit C++ app?
Yes, definitely. You any mix and matching you want to have here. So if you're having a 64-bit application, you would need the 64-bit InterBase client to go along with that. And a 64-bit InterBase client can talk to a 32-bit server, or vice versa, any combination you want.
I'm going to type in that other answer you had. It was max threads, right?
It's max_threads, and that goes in the IBconfig file. IBconfig file is just a text file. You can edit with a notepad. After you make that change, you do have to restart the InterBase server.
What is the number? What's the maximum number, if there is a limit, on processors that InterBase server will use if they are in the server hardware?
It's basically the maximum number your OS supports. So as we said, in the box, it's 8. Okay, so if you want more than 8, then you'd have to go off and buy additional user licensing. I think we've tested up to 32. I think that's what we've tested. I think Windows 7 supports 64-bit OSs support 64. Does that sound right, Anders, to you?
I'm actually not sure.
Yeah,
it could be.
That's what I've heard. But theoretically, whatever the OS supports, we should support. There's no theoretical limit.
Okay. The deployment page, is that new in XE3? Can't see it in XE2.
No, it's not. What you saw, well, I mean, the deployment manager in general is not new. What is new is the featured files. So when you saw me, I do featured files, and you saw to go, and you saw the InterBase client, that is somewhat new. Turns out you can actually do that yourself with XE2. There's actually an XML file called featured files.xml or something similar to that. If you search for in the Rad Studio directory, you can find that. It's just a text file. Add everything yourself and go off and do it yourself. Probably what you'd want to do is maybe install the XE3 trial if you haven't bought XE2, see how XE3 does it, and then you could do the same with XE2.
All right. How does one deploy an application for my customers that has a try, buy, or die license? I'm not sure what that's referring to.
Try, buy, or die?
Yeah. Uh-oh. Somebody didn't mute their phone.
That's right.
That's okay.
Okay. Anders, do you think that might have to do, or can they expand on their question? I'm thinking it might have to do something with like a trial or like a evaluation or something like that, maybe?
I'm going to guess that he is, his customer has given him, he says for trial. So I'm going to guess that he means that you're going to try this product out, and then you're going to decide if you're going to buy it or something else.
I see. Okay. Well, actually, so if it was a to-go application, okay, that would be really easy because you could just use the test. You could just use test deployment. Okay, that would work for well, depending on up to 90 days. I mean, as I talked about at the end, that's 90 days. So if you just let's say you originally got your license on what's today, December 12th. I got my license originally on September 15th. We couldn't get a new one until December 15th. Okay. Now, if you're talking about the server, what I would suggest in that scenario is you would tell your customer to go off and download the trial. Now, if you really want to deploy your application with the InterBase trial and you become an InterBase VAR, I'm thinking sales might be able to work something out for you.
Okay. As I understand it, InterBase Server on Windows uses the registry for the configuration info. What's used on non-Windows platforms for config info?
Well, there is some things that is used for the registry. You're right. That's basically to say where is the client installed. Okay. Really, you can do that with environment variables as well on Windows, so you don't have to have the registry. That's usually actually the way I do it. On non-Windows platforms, it's basically relying on your path.
There are no more questions at this time. So thank you very much, Quinn. Anything else you want to add?
I would just say Shriram, I know, gave the InterBase product address earlier today. Yep. If you had the InterBase questions, look for the replay of the InterBase product address when that becomes available. Okay, that's it for me.
All right. Thank you very much, Quinn.